I thought letting my stepson crash in my room for a few nights was harmless, until I found the note that changed everything. His words sent a chill down my spine. "I think about you all the time." Suddenly, the glances, the comments, and the late-night knocks on my door made sense in a way that terrified me. What happened next left me questioning everything about my family and my marriage. My name is Lisa, and for a brief moment in my life, I thought I'd finally found happiness. After years of being a single mom, I married David, a man who seemed like everything I had ever wanted: kind, hardworking, and deeply supportive. He brought stability into my chaotic life, and for the first time, I felt like I had a partner who truly had my back. David came with his own family dynamic, his teenage son, Tyler. At first, I was thrilled at the idea of being a stepmom. Tyler was polite, though a bit reserved, which I chalked up to the natural awkwardness of being a teenager. I had no doubt that with time, we'd develop a close bond. I even daydreamed about being a positive influence in his life. But life with a blended family is rarely simple. David's work required him to travel frequently, often leaving Tyler and me alone in the house. While I wasn't thrilled about the arrangement, I reassured myself that Tyler was a good kid, and besides, we'd barely cross paths. He spent most of his time locked away in his room, gaming or chatting with friends, and I was busy with work, chores, and trying to keep everything running smoothly. Then, one evening, Tyler came to me with a small issue: a leak in his room. Water was dripping from the ceiling, making his bed unusable. I wanted him to sleep comfortably and suggested the guest room, but he insisted he'd feel safer sleeping closer to me, just in case anything went wrong with the leak. Reluctantly, I allowed him to sleep on the couch in my room. At first, everything seemed fine. Tyler's presence was easy to ignore. He was quiet and respectful, and I even felt a little relieved that he seemed to trust me enough to stay nearby. But as the days passed, small things started to change. Tyler began opening up to me more, sharing his struggles and stories from school. I thought we were finally bonding. I didn't realize how wrong I was. The late-night conversations, the lingering glances, and the subtle compliments were all warning signs I missed, until it was too late. It started subtly, so subtly that I dismissed it at first. Tyler began spending more time in common spaces, hovering in the kitchen while I cooked or sitting closer than usual when we watched TV. I thought it was just his way of growing more comfortable around me, a sign that we were bonding as a family. I even found it endearing at times. Finally, we were breaking through his reserved exterior. But then the comments started. At first, they seemed harmless. "You look nice today," he'd say casually, his tone light, but his gaze would linger just a moment too long. Or, "David's lucky to have you," he'd remark with a small smile that left me squirming. I told myself I was overthinking it. He was just a teenager, probably awkward around women, and I didn't want to embarrass him by making it a big deal. One evening, as I cleaned up after dinner, I noticed Tyler watching me from across the room. His expression was unreadable, and when I asked him if something was wrong, he quickly shook his head and muttered, "No, nothing." But the unease stayed with me, a faint whisper in the back of my mind. Then came the note. I found it on my nightstand, tucked under a book I'd been reading. My name was scrawled across the front in Tyler's handwriting. Curious but confused, I opened it, and my heart dropped. The note read, "I think about you all the time." I froze, my hands trembling as I reread the words, hoping I had misunderstood. But there was no mistaking the meaning. My stomach churned, and a cold sweat broke out on my skin. I didn't know what to feel. Fear? Confusion? Anger? 1,000 questions raced through my mind. Was this a prank? A misunderstanding? Or something more sinister? I tucked the note back into the envelope and slid it into my pocket, determined to keep it hidden until I figured out what to do. The following days were unbearable. Tyler's behavior became more bold and difficult to ignore. He started knocking on my door late at night, claiming he couldn't sleep and wanted to talk. I tried to set boundaries, telling him it wasn't appropriate, but his persistence was unnerving. "Are you mad at me?" he'd ask, his tone dripping with faux innocence. "No, Tyler, but we need boundaries," I replied, trying to keep my voice firm. And then, the incident outside my window happened. It was past midnight, and I was lying in bed, struggling to fall asleep. Suddenly, I heard faint footsteps outside. My heart stopped. I told myself it could be an animal or the wind, but the sound was too deliberate, too human. I crept to the window, peeking through the curtain, and my blood ran cold. Tyler was standing in the shadows, just beyond the porch light, staring up at my window. I froze, unsure of what to do. Confronting him felt risky, but ignoring this was impossible. After a few tense moments, Tyler turned and walked back toward the house. Seconds later, I heard the creak of the back door. My heart pounded as I rushed to lock my bedroom door, every nerve in my body screaming that something wasn't right. Minutes later, there was a soft knock on my door. "Lisa." Tyler's voice was calm, almost too calm. "Are you awake?" I stayed silent, praying he would go away. But he didn't. Instead, he jiggled the doorknob. "Why is the door locked?" he asked, his tone shifting slightly, almost accusatory. I didn't answer. Eventually, his footsteps retreated down the hall, and I let out a shaky breath. But I knew this wasn't over. Something was very, very wrong. The tension in the house became unbearable. Every interaction with Tyler felt like walking a tightrope, and I constantly found myself second-guessing his actions, his words, and even my own responses. He was relentless, finding new ways to invade my space, both physically and emotionally. It was small at first, like hovering in the kitchen while I cooked or brushing past me in the hallway when there was clearly enough room to avoid contact. "Sorry," he'd mutter with a shy smile, but I could feel his gaze lingering far too long. Then came the compliments that no longer felt innocent. "You're so beautiful, Lisa," he said one morning, his voice soft, almost vulnerable. "I can see why my dad fell in love with you." I froze, unsure of how to respond. "Thank you," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral, but his words clung to me, making my skin crawl. Tyler didn't look away. His eyes locked on mine as though he were waiting for something, some kind of validation or reciprocation. I quickly excused myself, retreating to my bedroom to compose myself, but the unease stayed with me. That night, things escalated further. I was reading in bed when I heard a knock on my door. It was nearly midnight, and my heart sank as I realized it could only be Tyler. "Lisa, can I come in?" His voice was soft but insistent. "I just need to talk." "Tyler, it's late," I said firmly, hoping he'd take the hint. But instead, I heard the doorknob jiggle. Panic surged through me as I realized I hadn't locked the door this time. He opened it slowly, stepping inside with a nervous, almost apologetic expression. "I couldn't sleep," he said, standing awkwardly near the doorway. I feel like you're mad at me. Did I do something wrong?" I wanted to scream at him to leave, to demand that he respect my boundaries, but I felt paralyzed by the situation. "Tyler, you need to go back to your room," I said, my voice trembling slightly. Instead of leaving, he took a step closer. "Why are you always pushing me away?" he asked, his tone a mixture of frustration and sadness. "I'm not a bad person. I just want to feel close to someone. You're the only one who understands me." "Tyler, this isn't appropriate," I said, my voice firmer now. "You need to leave." He hesitated, his expression flickering between vulnerability and something darker. "I don't mean to scare you," he said, his voice softening. I care about you. A lot." I felt a lump rise in my throat. This wasn't the behavior of a confused teenager anymore. This was something far more troubling. "Tyler, I'm going to ask you one last time, leave. Now." His face hardened, and for a moment, I thought he might argue. But then he turned and left, shutting the door behind him. I locked it this time, my hands shaking as I twisted the lock into place. But the worst was yet to come. Later that night, I was jolted awake by the sound of my bedroom window sliding open. My heart stopped as I saw Tyler climbing through the window, his movements slow and deliberate. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger. "You locked the door," he said simply, as though that justified his actions. "I just wanted to talk. You're making this weird. Tyler, this is not okay." I snapped, backing away as he stepped into the room. "You need to leave. Right now." He hesitated, glancing toward the door as though considering his options. "You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I don't feel like I belong anywhere. You're the only one who's ever made me feel seen." "Tyler, this isn't about you feeling seen," I said, my voice trembling. "This is about boundaries. What you're doing is wrong, and it needs to stop." For a moment, I thought he might listen. His shoulders slumped, and he looked away, his face a mixture of guilt and sadness. But then his expression shifted, hardening into something I didn't recognize. "Maybe you're the one giving me mixed signals," he said, his tone sharp now. "You let me sleep in here. You didn't say anything about the compliments. What am I supposed to think?" My breath caught in my throat. "This isn't about mixed signals, Tyler," I said, my voice rising. "This is about you crossing lines that should never be crossed. I'm telling David everything." That seemed to snap something in him. His calm demeanor cracked, and he took a step closer. You don't have to do that, he said, his voice low, almost threatening. We can handle this ourselves. Just the two of us. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, my hands trembling as I dialed David's number. Tyler's expression darkened as he lunged toward me, but before he could stop me, David answered. Lisa? What's going on? He asked, his voice groggy but concerned. David, you need to come home, I said, my voice shaking. Right now. David arrived home the next morning, his face lined with worry as he stepped through the front door. I barely had time to greet him before Tyler appeared at the top of the stairs, his expression unreadable. The tension in the house was palpable, like a storm brewing, ready to explode. Lisa, what's going on? David asked, his voice firm but confused. Tyler stood silently watching us, his body tense as if preparing for what was to come. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before speaking. David, we need to talk, I said, glancing at Tyler, who didn't move from his spot. In private? No, Tyler said suddenly, his voice sharp. If you're going to talk about me, I deserve to hear it. David's brow furrowed as he looked between us. What's this about? He asked, his tone growing more serious. I hesitated, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. But I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. Tyler has been behaving inappropriately, I began, my voice trembling slightly. He's crossed boundaries that no child should ever cross. Tyler's face twisted in anger. She's lying, he shouted, taking a step down the stairs. She's the one who's been sending mixed signals, letting me stay in her room, acting like she cares about me. Tyler, enough. David's voice boomed, silencing him instantly. He turned to me, his expression demanding answers. Lisa, what's he talking about? I pulled the note from my pocket, the one that had haunted me since the moment I found it. This, I said, handing it to David. This is just one of the things I've been dealing with. David's face darkened as he read the note, his jaw tightening with each passing second. He turned to Tyler, his voice low and dangerous. Is this true? Tyler hesitated, his bravado cracking under the weight of his father's gaze. I just wanted her to notice me, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. You're never here, Dad. She's the only one who ever acts like I matter. That doesn't excuse what you've done, David said, his voice trembling with anger. You've put Lisa in an impossible situation, made her feel unsafe in her own home. Tyler's eyes filled with tears, but his expression remained defiant. You don't understand. You're gone all the time, and she. I'm done listening to excuses, David interrupted. Pack your things. You're staying with your mom for a while. What? Tyler's voice broke, a mixture of disbelief and fury. You're sending me away because of her? Because of your actions, David corrected, his tone unyielding. This isn't about Lisa. It's about you and the choices you've made. Tyler stormed upstairs, his footsteps echoing loudly through the house. The sound of his door slamming made me flinch, but I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally breathe. David turned back to me, his expression softening. Lisa, I'm so sorry, he said, running a hand through his hair. I had no idea this was happening. I should have been here. It's not your fault, I said, though part of me couldn't help but resent the fact that I'd been left to handle this alone. But we need to set some serious boundaries moving forward. This can't happen again. David nodded, his eyes filled with guilt. I'll talk to his mother. He needs help, professional help. That night, the house was eerily quiet. Tyler stayed in his room, and David and I spent hours talking, unpacking everything that had happened. I told him about the comments, the lingering glances, the note, and the moment Tyler climbed through my window. David listened intently, his face growing darker with every word. The next morning, Tyler left. David helped him pack his things and drove him to his mother's house without saying much. I watched from the window as they drove away, a strange mix of relief and sadness washing over me. I didn't want Tyler in my home anymore, but I couldn't help but feel for him. A lost, confused boy who had made a series of terrible decisions. David returned later that afternoon, looking exhausted but resolute. He's with his mom now, he said, sinking onto the couch. I told her everything. She's going to get him into therapy. Do you think it'll help? I asked, unsure if anything could undo the damage that had been done. I hope so, David said, his voice heavy. But we can't worry about that right now. We need to focus on us, on rebuilding trust and moving forward. I nodded, grateful for his support, but unsure of what the future held. The days that followed were a blur of awkward conversations and strained silences. David and I worked hard to repair the cracks in our relationship, but the events with Tyler had left scars that wouldn't heal overnight. One evening, as we sat on the couch together, David turned to me with a serious expression. "Lisa, I want you to know that I'm here for you, always. I won't let something like this happen again." "I know," I said, though the lingering fear in my chest made it hard to fully believe. "But we need to stay vigilant." Ignoring the red flags only made things worse. David nodded, pulling me into a comforting embrace. "We'll get through this," he said, his voice steady. "Together." The house felt strangely empty after Tyler left, as though his presence had left a shadow that lingered in every corner. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of safety, but it was overshadowed by the weight of what had happened. David and I tried to return to normal, but the tension between us was palpable. We were both grappling with guilt, anger, and confusion, emotions that seemed impossible to untangle. David was quieter than usual, spending long hours in his office or zoning out in front of the TV. I knew he was blaming himself for what had happened, and part of me did too. If he had been home more, if he had noticed the warning signs earlier, maybe things wouldn't have escalated the way they did. But I also knew that blaming him wouldn't change the past. We needed to move forward. Our conversations were strained at first, filled with awkward pauses and hesitant words. "Do you think I made the right call, sending him to his mom's?" David asked one night, his voice heavy with doubt. "You didn't have a choice," I replied, though I could hear the uncertainty in my own voice. "He needed to leave, for his sake and ours." David nodded, but I could see the guilt etched into his features. "I should have been here," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "I should have seen this coming." "You couldn't have known," I said gently, though the words felt hollow. We both missed the signs. But it wasn't just David who was struggling. I found myself questioning everything, my instincts, my actions, even my role in the family. Had I unintentionally encouraged Tyler's behavior? Was I to blame for the way things unfolded? These thoughts kept me up at night, replaying every interaction, every moment, looking for answers that never came. The aftermath of Tyler's departure extended beyond our household. David had spoken to Tyler's mother, explaining everything in as much detail as he could without overwhelming her. She was understandably shocked and upset, but to her credit, she took the situation seriously. She immediately enrolled Tyler in therapy, determined to get to the root of his behavior. Meanwhile, David and I worked to rebuild the trust that had been fractured between us. We started attending couples counseling, which gave us a safe space to unpack our emotions and communicate openly. It wasn't easy. There were moments of frustration, tears, and even anger, but it was a necessary step in our healing process. One of the hardest parts for me was the fear that lingered in the back of my mind. Even with Tyler gone, I found myself double-checking the locks on the doors and windows every night. Any unexpected sound or creak in the house made my heart race. I hated feeling this way in my own home, a place that was supposed to be my sanctuary. David noticed my unease and tried his best to reassure me. "You're safe now," he'd say, holding my hand tightly. "I promise, nothing like this will ever happen again." But promises felt fragile in the wake of what had happened. Trust was no longer something I could take for granted. It had to be rebuilt brick by brick. Tyler's actions also left a lasting impact on David. He couldn't stop replaying the moment he read the note, the weight of his son's words crushing him with guilt. "How did I not see this coming?" he asked me one night, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's my son. I should have known something was wrong." "David, you're not a mind reader," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "None of us could have predicted this. What matters now is that Tyler is getting the help he needs." David nodded, but I could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. He had always prided himself on being a good father, and this situation had shaken his confidence to its core. Watching him struggle was heartbreaking, but I knew that healing would take time, for both of us. Despite the challenges, there were small signs of progress. Our counseling sessions helped us communicate more openly, and over time, we began to find moments of normalcy again. We started cooking dinner together, laughing at old memories, and even planning a weekend getaway to reconnect as a couple. These small steps reminded me that while the road ahead would be difficult, it wasn't impossible. As for Tyler, the updates from his mother were mixed. Therapy seemed to be helping him, but progress was slow. He had apologized to her for his behavior and acknowledged that he needed help, which was a positive step. But there was still a long way to go, and I couldn't help but wonder if we'd ever be able to have a healthy relationship again. In the end, the fallout of Tyler's actions forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about our family, our boundaries, and ourselves. It wasn't easy, and the scars of that time would likely stay with us forever. But we were determined to move forward, one step at a time. Months have passed since Tyler left, and while the pain of what happened still lingers, we've started to find a new normal. The house feels different now, quieter, calmer. But every so often, I'll catch myself staring out the window or double-checking a locked door, and I'm reminded that some wounds take longer to heal than others. David and I have worked hard to rebuild our relationship. Counseling has been a lifeline, giving us the tools to communicate better and confront the guilt and resentment that lingered beneath the surface. I've learned to open up about my fears, while David has learned to accept that he can't fix everything. It's okay to not have all the answers, I told him during one of our sessions. What matters is that we're facing this together. Tyler remains with his mother, and while his absence has been a relief, it's also left a strange emptiness in our lives. David still talks to him regularly, keeping the lines of communication open. I've stayed out of their conversations, unsure if or when I'll be ready to interact with him again. It's not about holding a grudge, it's about protecting my peace. Tyler's therapy seems to be helping. According to his mother, he's starting to understand the gravity of his actions and the pain he caused. He's expressed regret, though I'm not sure if it's enough. Regret is only the first step. Accountability and change must follow. Part of me hopes he can find a way to grow from this, to become a better person. Another part of me still feels the weight of his betrayal too deeply to think about forgiveness yet. Looking back, I've come to realize just how important boundaries are in any relationship, especially within blended families. What started as a simple gesture of kindness, letting Tyler stay in my room, spiraled into a situation that could have destroyed our family. It taught me that ignoring red flags, no matter how small, only allows them to grow. It's a hard lesson, but one I'll carry with me moving forward. David and I have set clear rules and boundaries for the future. We've learned that communication isn't just about talking. It's about listening, understanding, and acting on what's being said. It's about addressing issues before they snowball into something unmanageable. If nothing else, this experience has made us stronger as a couple. It forced us to confront not just the cracks in our family dynamic, but also the cracks within ourselves. If there's one thing this ordeal has taught me, it's that love and trust are fragile. They require constant care and attention. It's easy to take them for granted, to assume they'll always be there, unshaken. But the truth is, even the strongest relationships can falter under the weight of unspoken fears and unresolved issues. Rebuilding trust takes time, effort, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. To anyone who finds themselves in a situation like mine, my advice is simple. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Speak up, set boundaries, and don't be afraid to ask for help. It's better to address a problem head-on than to let it fester. And above all, remember that your safety and peace of mind are non-negotiable. David and I are still healing, but we're hopeful for the future. Our relationship isn't perfect, it never was and it never will be. But it's real and it's worth fighting for. Together, we've learned that even in the face of betrayal and heartache, it's possible to find strength, resilience, and hope. If you were in Lisa's position, what would you have done? Do you think Tyler deserves forgiveness, or are some lines unforgivable? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will leave you speechless. Stay tuned. Our next story is one you won't want to miss.